appreciate your time and attention. Our consultants, our legal counsel, members of the public, thank you all for joining us. This is our first meeting at 9 a.m. and it feels good. So, Lieutenant Governor, thanks for that suggestion, and we look forward to having or keeping this 9 a.m. slot. Incidentally, I had a meeting, or not a meeting, but I had a brief discussion with Lieutenant Governor, and she made a really good point. It would be nice when we can all get together around the table again. And Alan, maybe that's something we can talk about at some point, is when we could begin doing face-to-face meetings. So with that, let me just give you all a little bit of a rundown of how much has been accomplished since we last met. And many of you have been involved in these activities. We've held a public open house. Thanks, Muriel, for all of your help getting that together. Met with working groups and stakeholder advisory committees, met with the governor and legislative leadership, arranged to consult with some of the leading developers in the country regarding our framework plan and our approach. We initiated a hiring process for a director of operations, worked with industry leaders in advanced aeronautic vehicles. That's kind of an exciting topic. Reached out to potential members of the advisory committee, explored project proposals, refined our planning based on board input, and also received significant media attention, exposure, and much more. It's when you look at all of that that's been accomplished since we last met, you can appreciate how quickly things are moving and how much is being accomplished within a compressed time frame. So with that intro, let's go to the next item on the agenda, is to turn time for public comment. If there are members of the public who have joined us and would like to comment subject to our procedure and rules, you're welcome to do that. If you would speak up and say your name, we'll recognize you for comment. Not hearing anyone speaking up, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is, as I mentioned, approval of the minutes. How are we doing now, Alan, with a quorum? Can we take that matter up, or should we hold that?
We do have a quorum, so we can take action.
All right. So CC, again, thank you for a great job on the minutes. We've all received a copy of the minutes held of our meeting held on April 13th. A lot of great discussion, and CC, I thought you did a great job of capturing all of that. If you've had a chance to review the minutes, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner. Motion is made to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I think that was Lieutenant Governor.
Yes.
Thanks, Lieutenant Governor. All in favor of the motion that we approve those minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. The motion appears to be unanimous, so the minutes are approved. So the next item on the agenda relates to the abandonment of a water line easement. Board members, you will recall that we touched upon this issue in our last meeting. We had a presentation from, I believe, Jim, it was from members of your department, DFCM, who explained what this would mean to abandon, what it would mean to this project. And there were some legal issues. And so it was our motion that we turn the matter to our legal counsel to review and come back and educate us and perhaps also make a recommendation. So JC, we'll turn the time to you. We appreciate you being here and for your assistance.
Thank you. You all will recall this discussion from last time, and as you recall, we kind of wanted to turn this over to DFCM and actually the Department of Natural Resources to work through and that I would work with them on that. Just by way of maybe reminding you of some of the issues there, there is an easement for a water line that goes through the city of Draper and ends on the state prison property, which is why we are engaged in that. There's just a small portion of that easement that is on our property. The water right that goes along with that belongs to the Division of Forestry and Fire for the state. And that piece of water, which is a fairly small water right, has actually been leased back to Draper Irrigation. So it's not something that the state is currently utilizing. And this easement for that water purpose is not currently being utilized. There's a 5-year lease that is related to that. The water easement that is an underground easement that's been in existence and in use for quite some time, again, is not currently being used. If we ever wanted to utilize that, it would require some significant upkeep and use for those purposes. So both Forestry and Fire and DFCM are recommending that we abandon this easement. I don't see any reason why we would not agree with that. And so that would be my recommendation, is that we ratify or approve that action by those two groups. I know, Michael, I see you here on the call. Do you have anything that you would want to add to that? If not.
Michael, if you're with us, you may, and you're speaking, you may be muted.
Okay, I did that one.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Still learning this thing. Yeah, just by way of clarification. So the idea would be, because the water line is mostly off of the Pomsla property, but partially on the Pomsla property, what we would actually do, what we're looking at doing it, would be abandoning it in segments. And basically the way that would work right now is we have some homeowners who have come to us and, basically said, this easement's a problem for us on our property. We can't build or whatever. We would not abandon the entire easement all at once. But as those issues came up, as those homeowners came to us, we would essentially give them quit claim deeds to their own property that would abandon the easement on the property, on their property. We would do that both on the portions of the easement that are on the off of the Pomsla land, and on the Pomsla land, we probably would just at some point have Pomsla abandon the easement. In the past, when we've done anything with property out there as far as granting easements or abandoning easements, the way I've done the actual document required both Jim Russell's and Alan's signature. I think that's making it way more complicated than it needs to be. So if the board approves, what I would do going forward is, as these issues came up with these homeowners, is just have DFCM sign a quit claim deed or an abandonment of easement or something to that effect that would abandon the easement segment on that homeowner's property. And I'd put the usual language in there about it being abandoned in place, and the state not being liable for removal or for anything having to do with it once we did that. I think that'd be my recommendation. And then just with the observation, and I'm sure this is clear to everybody, but because it is a water line, once we abandon the first segment, it's not of any use anymore to anybody. So that's all I've got on that.
Thanks, Mike.
Are there any questions from the group about this issue? Sorry, Representative Snow.
Any questions from the board? I don't see any hands and don't hear anyone speaking up. JC and Michael, your explanations have been really helpful. I think they've really clarified the nature of the right that we would be abandoning, which doesn't, as I understand everything you've said, doesn't really have a great deal of value. I think, especially as we recognize that the legislation that created POMSLA specifically indicates that all services, including utility services to this site, will be handled by Draper City. So it seems like the appropriate thing to do. That's just my comment as chair. Your explanations have been helpful. Unless there are any questions, I would recommend or suggest that the board can take a motion to abandon the easement, subject to having legal counsel approve the documents to accomplish that. And I would also recommend that as part of the motion that relating to what Mr. Kelly said, that we authorize DFCM to execute on behalf of POMSLA these homeowner pieces as they come up, needing to be cleared, that we authorize DFCM to execute on behalf of those documents on behalf of POMSLA. That would be my recommendation. Do I have a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chair, Troy Walker, I move that we approve the abandonment of the easements with subject to the legal documents, along with the authority for DCFM to sign on behalf of POMSLA in the abandoning of the property of the homeowners. Thanks,
Mayor Walker. The motion then before us is to accomplish exactly what, what Mayor Walker has indicated, including having our legal counsel approve the actual documentation, and for future releases, having DFCM execute. Do I have a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Thanks, April. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion from any of the board members?
I'm not a board member, but could I just get some clarification on the legal counsel part of this? Do you want me to prepare the documents and then have JC sign off on them? Because frankly, I think if we're doing that, it's going to be a kind of a waste of her time. I'm happy to do it, but there's going to be a lot of very real simple documents that are essentially quitclaim deeds. Again, happy to do it, but I think it'd go a lot smoother if, just as these things came up, DFCM just executed the quitclaim deed. And again, I just want to clarify, as far as the actual pipeline itself, most of it is on homeowner property, as far as I can tell, but there are other parts of the other types of property that runs across. And the goal would eventually be to just have the entire easement abandoned in place to whoever the underlying property owner is, whoever the owner of the dominant estate is.
That seems appropriate. JC, is that okay with you if you have Mr. Kelly take a stab at the first draft?
Of course.
Well, and again, there'll probably be more than one kind, because there's going to be different situations that come up. So you want me to run those by you just as to form, and then after you've approved them as to form, we'll go ahead with those forms that you've approved without bothering you with every time it comes up? Does that work?
Hey,
I think let's talk through the first couple and then we can
Okay. All right.
see how that goes.
Can you hear me,
Thank you.
Representative Snow?
Yes, someone had a question or comment, board member?
Yeah, this Jim Russell. You recommended that we had some consultation with legal counsel, but Mayor Walker, I don't believe included that. I think his was a little simpler and cleaner. I've just given DFCM the authority to do the easement abandonments. And Mike lead off what you said.
I think,
yeah, I think he simplified it a little bit.
Mayor Walker, would you like to speak to that?
I did. I realized that it was likely these quitclaim deeds, which would be probably a good waste of JC's time to review them all. And there's a lot of them along that line. It seems to me that DCFM obviously has an obligation to, do right by us and the state as well. So I'm comfortable if they prepare those deeds, and, if we want to have them looked at the end, or if there's something arises, we can always, engage our council. But that was my motion. I could be persuaded otherwise, I suppose.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that clarifies your motion. And April, I'm believing that you will approve that as part of your second.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll take a vote on that motion. All in favor of the motion as stated and clarified by the mayor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And sorry, someone's really trying to get me. All right, the motion carries. And JC, thank you for your help. And Mr. Kelly, thank you. We'll allow you to handle that documentation to accomplish that. So the next item on the agenda is a matter related to Aspire. Representatives of Aspire are with us today. Aspire is a multi-university private sector partnership. It is a leading consortium of higher education institutions and private companies around the country working on advanced electric vehicle charging technology. By the way, I've seen some of that technology on the campus of Utah State University, the big electric bus charging plate. It is known as Aspire. This consortium is operating under a significant National Science Foundation grant. We've asked the leaders of Aspire to provide an overview of their work and how it might apply to the point. So with that, we're going to turn time to Reagan Zane and David Christensen, who are here from Utah State University. Those of you who are Aggies will be happy to have someone here representing this institution. So with that, Reagan and David, we'll turn the time to you.
Representative Snow, thank you so much. Appreciate time here with the board and those that are in attendance. With that introduction, I don't know how much more I need to say about the center itself. I appreciate the highlight of the program. I'm going to share my slides. I won't hit you with too much PowerPoint, I hope. Planning just a brief introduction, some of the technologies we're working with, where we see alignment with the point, and I'm hoping we have sufficient time here for additional discussion as we consider opportunities for piloting technologies that are developed through Aspire at the point. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I am going to pull this up here. And I'll give it just a moment to get the screen share working. All right, you see my screen okay?
Yes. I can see it. Yep, it looks
Excellent.
good.
Okay. All right, so my name is Reagan Zane. I'm the center director, and David Christensen is our innovation director that works with me here at Aspire. We've prepared a few highlights here. As was mentioned, the Aspire Center is an NSF-sponsored engineering research center, often called an ERC. The ERC program within NSF is considered their flagship program for center level, broad industry, government, partner, collaborative research centers across multiple institutions. They also they fund essentially one center per topic area in areas where there are significant national need with impact on society. And the NSF Aspire Center has been awarded as the only center in the United States that's committed and dedicated to charging systems and infrastructure for electric vehicles. So let me give you just a brief highlight of what the Aspire Center is and how we see good alignment with the opportunities moving forward here at the point. First, a re-emphasis, this flagship program from NSF is headquartered here in Utah, led by Utah State University and partnered with multiple core partners around the country, University of Colorado at Boulder and Purdue University, University of Texas, El Paso. We also have a core international partner in the University of Auckland. We also have what we call affiliated partners that are distributed also around the country, and additional partners, including here in Utah, that are being added as affiliated partners. We also have 4 national laboratories that are involved, and a large group of both innovation and industry partners. In total, we have over 65 faculty involved, just over 250 participants, including students and staff member and faculty. The NSF program is a $50 million grant over 10 years, awarded to Utah State University. And that's really seen as the catalyst for significant additional government funding and industry partnership, and real opportunity for change and impact, particularly in the states housed by our center. Let me just briefly highlight a couple of our partnerships. We have partners ranging from automotive OEMs, including light duty such as Toyota and Ford, and also heavy duty programs such as Kenworth and the PACCAR company, Cummins. And we also work with infrastructure companies, major electrical and charging system, also utilities, national labs, as I'd mentioned. But we're essentially bringing together the team necessary to look at how we address electrification at scale. How do we do this cost effectively? How do we do this through innovation to make a real difference? All right, so as we look at our objectives, we thought it might be helpful to list out, let's say, 3 of the key objectives that we think are mutual objectives between the Aspire Center and the Point, in areas where we see great opportunity for collaboration and piloting programs here in the coming years. First, just a brief highlight, I think we're each interested in a sustainable and equitable environment for citizens and operations and at the site. So overall, our Aspire vision and our mission is to achieve a sustainable and equitable future for transportation. In doing so, we have a strong emphasis on improving health, improving prosperity through economic impact, and also specifically addressing equity and access, both to jobs and economic opportunity, and also to health and air quality. We believe that our goals in doing so can be achieved through widespread electrification, and I'll emphasize this as we go, a need for addressing all vehicle classes, meaning everything from light duty passenger vehicles up to delivery and freight and fleets, as well as each of the groups, from personally owned vehicles to fleets. The approach that we are taking here at Aspire is to involve multiple disciplines, even multiple colleges. Here at Utah State and across our partners, we involve both all disciplines across engineering, but also the College of Business as we look at economics and the business scenario for public-private partnerships, and a strong emphasis on the consumer, fleet operators, and users and their preferences and their needs to really drive the technology development. We're looking at a combination of technologies. Rep Snow mentioned the wireless technology systems that we are looking at, and I'll give a strong emphasis on that and the potential impact at the Point for those technologies. In combination, we're also looking at wired systems. Overall, we're looking at solutions that really turn the existing paradigm in some ways upside down, essentially looking at how is it that we can essentially significantly reduce the battery requirements on vehicles and the implications and impacts on the grid by bringing power to the vehicle so that we can charge and operate vehicles where they would normally operate. This technology is also being combined with a variety of technologies integrating with the grid. And Rocky Mountain Power here in the state of Utah is a strong partner of our program. And with them, we are looking at smart charging technologies that have direct integration and coordination with the distribution and transmission and even generation capabilities of the grid to minimize the impact and overall decrease the cost of charging systems. And finally, a unique aspect of our program is that in addition to looking at user behavior, matching up charging systems and technologies and their integration with the electric utility, we are also looking specifically at how to map and match these technologies with transportation, as well as even city planning and design. so that the charging systems and the vehicles are well integrated with the future vision of how transportation systems are operating, and even so that these systems are well coordinated, so that the impact on users and fleets is minimal when considering the electric vehicle and their charging system. Of course, we see a significant synergy.
Yep, I'm fine, thank you.
We see a significant synergy of these technologies
Yep,
with
good to see you.
with connected and autonomous vehicles. Where, of course, as we move towards autonomy, having vehicles that will essentially, find opportunities and will charge themselves creates a real synergy and opportunity. We have a strong emphasis, as I've highlighted here at the bottom, on utilization, meaning the better we utilize both the batteries on the vehicle, the user's time and the fleet time, and the electric utility and its distribution network. These all lead to low-cost systems and a more ubiquitous charging experience, meaning an opportunity to charge when, where, and wherever those vehicles are operating. All right, so that's a brief highlight of the approach that we're taking to achieve a sustainable and equitable system. Let me just briefly highlight our technologies, and we'll have some time for discussion on how this fits with the point. We have a strong emphasis on innovation-driven designs, leading to commercial development. We believe this can help enhance our mutual objectives of jobs and impact on the industries. The technologies that we're developing, I highlighted a couple of the concepts in the previous slide. Here, just give a nice picture of emphasizing the technologies we're looking at are going across all platforms, from light duty to heavy duty vehicles. We have projects in Salt Lake City for buses and electric bus systems and their charging infrastructure. We're also combining and integrating these with the charging needs or the electrical demand and needs of the light rail system in Salt Lake City. Overall, we're looking at the holistic scenario. How is it that combined electrification across these vehicle classes can lead to a low-cost solution? We believe that the point really brings in a unique opportunity to now investigate a new innovation-based siting where we can incorporate the capabilities and loading of the buildings with renewable energy and sources together with the vehicles that will be coming to and from the site, as well as, for example, the circulator and microtransit on the site. So we're looking at a combination of these technologies. You'll see the theme at the top, charging so seamless you won't even know you're using it. We'd like to bring electric vehicles to a stage similar to the way we operate cell phones today, where you really don't even think anymore about, am I going to have coverage, and can I keep my my cell phone charged? Both of those we see moving to a future vision of so seamless you hardly even notice. All right, brief highlight of the technology. I'll just give a short video that we've put together. If you've been to our website, you might have seen this video. It highlights the wireless component of the technologies. This is here at our site at Utah State, up at the track where we have the electric bus currently operating. You can come on up here and see a demonstration where we have charging of the electric bus from the vehicle, from the road. We're also looking at solutions where we've already run a demonstration. This is with the Toyota vehicle in partnership with Toyota for an SUV. We also have a light duty sedan. And then just emphasizing and highlighting that these technologies are now integrated with and coordinated with the electric grid for minimizing cost. I'll highlight just very briefly about the center itself. I know we're just about out of time here for my presentation. I'd like to move to a discussion. I'll highlight within the Aspire Center, we're looking at core technologies. These include both fast charging of vehicles, so you can charge your vehicle in 5 to 10 minutes, as well as this concept of integrating the charging systems into the pavements so that those autonomous vehicles can be operated almost continuously with very small batteries and very low cost. We're looking at a variety of technologies. We're looking at the overall systems operation, from building systems to renewable energy and their impact on the electric vehicles, as well as market and workforce development in this space. I mentioned we're working across disciplines, from adoption to transportation to power and data. This backing of faculty and expertise and industry and innovation can all support a partnership here with the Inland Port. All right, we are developing systems of systems test beds. One is our inner city simulator, as we call it. This is essentially our digital sandbox where we can vet and test various concepts. for the port with this intercity simulator that we're developing, we could actually go through and evaluate and vet both the movement of people and freight in and around in all the operations around the point, and vet out the impact that the technologies would have in an overall system simulator. And then we have a hardware systems test bed where any new technologies that we're developing we would want to transition into a commercial operation at the point can be vetted and evaluated here at the USU site. All right, and then finally, we are mutually interested in statewide economic and environmental impact. And I thought I'd just briefly note a number of related projects. We're not going to go through them in detail, but just note them in title and purpose, and then we'll jump to the point itself. But point really does fit uniquely in emphasizing another aspect of both vehicles and innovation and in a living environment that we just don't have anywhere else. But it's a good synergy to the other programs we have running around the state. One I'll highlight is the partnership with Pacific Corp, Rocky Mountain Power, where they're leading the Westmart EV project that some of you may be familiar with from our previous 5 years. We now have a second iteration of that project called Westmart EV at Scale. This is a community partnership program that's emphasizing development of new concepts for EV adoption and infrastructure development. And of course, again, it's based here out of Salt Lake in Utah. And we're looking to now expand all the neighboring states with partnerships with all the Clean City programs in each of the states, and then deploying and evaluating and vetting concepts that could also be synergistic with some of the goals at the point with respect to urban mobility, for example, and the emphasis on underserved regions and freight and port electrification that are happening nearby that could help support operations at the point. We also have the Intermodal Hub Project with the Utah Transit Authority here in downtown Salt Lake, where we're looking at merging the demands, electrical needs of the TRAX line together with the facility itself and bus charging and public charging systems. And these technologies, again, are technologies we can leverage in future pilots. We also have the Freight Logistics Electrification Project that's recently being planned and awarded here within the state with additional federal support currently in progress. This is a strong emphasis on how do we break down those barriers for medium duty and heavy duty electrification, and could feed demonstration projects where we could have delivery, perhaps even feeding the point with electric vehicles transitioning from the airport and the inland port and the general warehousing areas around Salt Lake, feeding deliveries and needs up to the point with all electric transportation. And finally, we have pending projects for connected community programs, looking at smart buildings, integration with electric vehicle charging, and electrified microtransit programs that will also be quite synergistic. All right, so finally, with that introduction, hope I've left just a few minutes for discussion. I'll just reemphasize a couple of areas where we see some significant opportunity for applying Aspire technologies here in the coming years at the point. One is developing and deploying charging systems for some of the vehicles that will be coming to and from the point itself. And I mentioned, for example, bringing in partnerships where we have electric delivery as well as freight that could come to the site, and we could have a combination of charging systems for those vehicles so they can go between warehouses, distribution centers, and this site. We also have the wireless charging technology, and truly we see an ideal opportunity here at the point with the concept of the circulator, where we anticipate having autonomous vehicles operating on a fixed route in a controlled environment, running repeated operations and routes where over time we'd like to see both smaller and everything from small couple passenger deliveries to to small vans and shared use, utilizing that circulator. This really could be an ideal opportunity. It's relatively low speed, the power demands are low, but these autonomous vehicles could run essentially continuously from the charging systems as we're developing them. These could be integrated with charging sites for regular, for e-bikes, perhaps combining with standard bikes, and could be developed with planning for future growth, essentially future-proofing the charging system for the roads as they're being developed on site. And then finally, integration of these technologies that I've mentioned, where we could have some of the smart capabilities that we're developing for the buildings that are going into the site and help with some of the specification for the communications required for smart buildings. Also integration with renewable energy, additional battery energy storage, and then this overall charge management at the sites. Again, doing so that we can both leverage renewable energy sources and overall reduce cost. Okay. All right, so I hope it wasn't too much presentation. An emphasis that, hey, where we want to go in the future is the ability to have electrification with electric vehicles that essentially charge where the vehicles are at. Let you go where you want to go, let the charging take care of itself. We see opportunities to really vet these technologies at the point. And let's go ahead and stop here. I know we may only have a few minutes for discussion, but I hope this was helpful for, considering opportunities as we move forward.
Thank you, Regan. Great presentation. Exciting time with the technology coming together with this project. Let's take questions from board members about your presentation or about this technology.
Let me jump in, please. Thank you. Thank you, Regan. This is terrific. And to the board members, you heard me talk about the concept of smart cities that I saw the demonstration in Columbus, Ohio a couple of years ago. This is exactly what he's showing us here, what they're doing there. But this is really at an upper scale. So it's really impressive what you're just showing us there. Regan, how give us a timetable about, and maybe I missed this at the first, how far off and until this is ready for prime time, number one, and what do you want from us? What do you want from us?
Yeah, great question, and I appreciate the comment as well. There are aspects of the technologies that could be ready for integration and evaluation at a site like the Point, even within the next 1 to 2 years. These would certainly include the communications built in, adding in the smart capability of coordinating charge management at different buildings together with the building loads. I think that's something we'd love to see integrated into the planning of the site and the specifications for buildings going in at that site, even at this very early stage. We are also ready to look at deployment of stationary, both plug-in and wireless charging. There's an existing standard that says that we're ready for prime time for these smaller vehicles. We have one partner that is interested in deploying small autonomous circulator type vehicles, and we're going to be piloting that here at the EBR at USU over the next year. So I think that technology could be an early opportunity for vetting a circulator at the Point, let's say within the next two to 3 years. What we're looking for, we'd love to better understand the planning timelines here at the Point, the coordination and how decisions will be made for the community planning for smart management and communications across buildings and the potential for future-proofing charging systems. And to the extent that we can find the right alignment, we think we would really love to see an opportunity to partner and deploy a pilot of this autonomous, smart charging circulator at the Point, let's say over the next 2 to 3 years.
Other questions from the board? Senator.
Yes. During the last session, we actually set aside money. We gave a grant to Aspire for $5 million to Utah State University. And then we also put $15 million in the loan fund for our authorities that we were working with when we put that together originally. And so there's 15 million there that I think there's a lot of folks think that's tied directly to the inland port, but it's not. It's in that loan fund that we structured. And, there's nothing prohibitive about putting more in. And the other thing I think is rather exciting is if we just take a minute and think about what's going on. We've got this federal money, we're a little hesitant to dive into that. We just got the rules yesterday, and there's 158 pages of rules that we're working through, but there's money there. If President Biden is successful in putting together an infrastructure loan or an infrastructure bank that would come to the state, there would be another a lot of money there. And then I'm starting to look at our state economy, and I don't think it's changed. If anything, it's better than it was a year ago. And so we could anticipate maybe there's going to be a lot of one-time money in the general session. So we certainly need to move this project forward, but I think they're right where they need to be on this. And I certainly would support moving this project forward under an electrification process.
Thank you, Senator. And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of moving it forward, which raises a question, Regan, I have for you. If we're not quite there on the technology, is there infrastructure that you would recommend at least be placed as the technology matures? Do you understand my question?
Absolutely. And that is something that we could work together on. That's an aspect of the center and the work that we're doing now is showing how to future-proof systems for the advancement of the technologies. And so there are significant steps that we could take in terms of the electrical infrastructure, as well as the conduit and the planning and the communications that would really align our ability to adopt these technologies and really put our best foot forward to become the pace setter, and the standards will follow. So I think there is work that we could do immediately that would best align the infrastructure for these systems.
Thank you. And I guess that goes to the issue that you responded to, or the response to Representative Handy about what is it you want. You would like to be involved in the planning process so that we can make make plans at some point to implement the technology. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and based on our discussions with Alan and the team, it sure seems that the time is now. And so I think it's important that we get involved sooner than later, and we'd love to participate and provide guidance on this infrastructure development.
Thanks, Regan. Commissioner Wolstenholme.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Reagan. It's good to see you again. I'm very familiar with what Reagan's got going on at Utah State, but I 100% agree. This would be a big miss to the state of Utah if we don't capitalize on this right now. In the benefit, the stars are kind of aligning in my mind of when we have a whole new segment of property that we're going to develop, not to have this be a part of it and be at the forefront, I think is going to, I just don't think there's many states that have this opportunity to develop and do what we're set to do. And so I fully hope that we would move forward in this direction and have the legislature continue to support this moving forward to where we can implement that, and really does put the state in a position that we want to be in. So thanks, Reagan, to you and your team and for all the work that you've done. I know this has been a long journey for you, but I think you're finally starting to see the fruits of your labor, and it's much appreciated.
Thanks, Commissioner. Steve.
Well, I'm just wondering if the next step wouldn't be to just put together a little working group amongst, with us, staff and the planning team, and maybe have some further discussions with Reagan and start to build a list of what the, a series of actual components might be that could be integrated into the plan and the infrastructure, and take this to the next level of a little bit more concrete, sort of a work program to carry this forward.
So, I think it's a great suggestion, Steve, and we don't have this down as an action. I'm not certain that we need that, but unless there is opposition on the part of the board, I think we'd ask Alan to work with you, Steve, and let's see if we can put that together. Let me just say, I think what Commissioner said and Senator Stevenson, we really are missing the boat if we don't take advantage of this. And there are provisions built into the legislation that relate to our emphasis to air quality and to sustainability. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes, but this is right in the middle. This is right in the middle of what we're trying to accomplish here. And ultimately, this intersects with, or could intersect with, our emphasis on research and development with higher ed. So we're fortunate, incredibly fortunate, Regan, to have our higher ed institutions and all of those partners you listed become a part of this project, or at least have an investment in terms of interest. So is there any objection to Steve's suggestion, recommendation? Alan, you okay with working with him on that issue?
Absolutely. We'll get it started.
So Regan, they'll be back with you. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming here today and for your presentation. And as I said, it's a cutting edge, but it's right in the mainstream of what we're trying to accomplish here. So your timing's excellent.
Really appreciate it. Thanks again for everyone's time. Look forward to the working group. I think it's a great next step, and we'll look forward to getting involved. And I'll just note, we couldn't agree more that the stars are really aligning here. Even over the past couple of years, we've been quite successful in the projects I just showed in getting Department of Energy funding here into the state. And they've been multiple times, commenting, wow, look what's happening in Utah. They have just felt like this is an ideal place for them to invest and see the programs advance, just based on some of the unique capabilities of these programs. And now this brings it to a whole new level with the new administration, with the new federal emphasis in each of the areas that were just highlighted. The point really just triples down on that concept of Utah being the place where the federal government can really vet some of these new ideas and take it out to the nation. And that's going to lead to new opportunities, new jobs, and Utah would be the likely place to start this, given that the technologies were developed and vetted here in the state. So I couldn't be more excited to be part of it. Thank you again.
Thank you. And Steve and Alan will be back in touch with you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is this discussion that we've just had with Regan is really a good lead into the sustainability concepts and the metrics for the point. And as I mentioned, part of the legislation that created POMSLA directed our group, our board, to improve air quality and reduce resource use as we build out this site. And I think those of you who have attended some of the public meetings know that there is public support for making the point a model of sustained development. That's something that comes up. It came up during our work with the Point of the Mountain Development Commission and with the public outreach. As part of our efforts to create a framework master plan for the point, our consultant SOM has been exploring ways to incorporate sustainability strategies and metrics into our planning and ultimately into the plan. So we have a guest with us today who is going to take us through the sustainability lead on behalf of our consultant SOM. And we're going to turn some time to her. And her name is Arathea Gowda. And Arathea, if I mispronounced your name, I hope you'll forgive me. But we're excited to have you here and have you talk about these issues. And please correct me, because I'd like to know if I was correct and if I need to be corrected.
Hi, Lowry. That was really actually quite close. It's Arathea Gowda. It's a tricky one, but just like sustainability on the project, I would say. And let me share my screen, kind of get this up and running. Very kind introduction. And again, SOM Sustainability has been working on this in collaboration with all of the disciplines, design disciplines on the Point of the Mountain. And Alan had asked us to come in today and just share a little bit with you where we are in terms of key performance metrics. And Regan really helped us set it up today and get us excited about the possibility. And one of the things, obviously, that we all know is that one of the key vision elements for the project is sustainability. We know it's a once in a lifetime opportunity and has all of the potential to be a regional and national and global model. And so all of you have been aware throughout the life of this project about the huge and high aspirations. And so one of the things the sustainability team has started working on in the last 2 phases of design is really who can we partner with? How can we partner with different organizations along with the design framework in order to bake sustainability in at, I would say, a cost that is feasible. So part of that will be working with groups like Reagan's and partners to make sure that we can get our aspirations built. And so some of you may or may not have seen this. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly in about 15 minutes so we can have Q&A. But we started the project in stage 1, thinking about a custom framework, processing everything that we heard from the point team and the community engagement side. But we recognize that frameworks like LEED neighborhood development are also globally recognized and really drivers of cost efficiency and resource efficiency. And so our recommendation at the end of stage 1 was really to make a custom framework that included elements of LEED ND and then also third-party certifications like WELL and the Living Building Community. So again, always thinking about having a global exemplary project in terms of sustainability. But what floated to the top in terms of key performance indicators were really 2 general buckets of sustainability. One was quality of life. And of course, we just heard that about the emissions profiling of our transit and electrification. So thinking about mobility, and then also ecology, just being in the Draper Valley, how important it is to everyone's lifestyle, the preservation of ecology, and having that as an amenity within the project. And then, of course, there was the idea of resource utilization. So we are at an inflection point locally and globally in terms of energy, water, and waste. And so how can we have the maximum amount of conservation? And then also think about cyclical processes. So we're not designing just for today, but as a master plan unfurls, we're ready for the future, a highly resource efficient future. And so the project team, and this is too small for you to see, so don't worry about reading it. We'll send you a copy. But the project team worked together with all of our disciplines to think about what are some key performance indicators that can drive the design of the project. We started with these aspirations, and Peter and the team have been working very diligently to incorporate them into the framework master plan. Some of them are engineering efficiencies that might be designed later, but a large majority of them are really baked into the framework. So for instance, 40% open space, that's just absolutely intrinsic to all of the options that we have on the table for the project. And so in total, we're really thinking about how we can reduce in these categories and then also improve the positive benefits. So when we think about the high level KPIs and all of these categories, we're thinking that in aggregate, they'll result in 50% emissions reduction from mobility, a 25% increase in carbon sequestration, and 100% biodiversity improvement over business as usual. A 50% efficiency cut, and then renewables to meet that, so we're at net zero. 40% water efficiency, 100% rainwater for irrigation, and the potential for gray water at building scale. And then finally, in terms of waste, 50% recycling and 75% construction waste diversion. We're also considering the possibility of a resource-based waste to energy facility. So this is a little bit of detail, and we're not going to, I think, go through any of these unless the project team wants us to stop the board and dwell on some of this. But again, the delta between all of our wonderful aspirations and reality is really, can we find the right partnerships? Can we drive down the cost? And how do we implement it? Is it the master developer? Is it the parcel developer? Is it the third party? Or is it a government intervention that will help us realize our aspirations? So for each of the strategies and the key performance indicators, the project team has started looking at what's the impact area, what's the baseline, and you can see this on my cursor, but baseline is essentially indicated as state or Salt Lake City or Draper County code. What's our target aspiration? And so by this, we're starting to define what the delta is between what's business as usual and where we want to be. Talking about the benefit at a very high level. So again, you know, it's really important to us during the community and stakeholder engagement to define what the benefits are and then really move our energy, our design efforts towards the highest benefit. And then we have started, obviously there's several options, but thinking about a relative cost interpretation, and this of course will be refined over time. You'll see that some of them are very high level as we quickly give you a snapshot overview, but we anticipate as the program settles down, the framework settles down, and the population settles down, the cost will be able to be tightened so that, again, we can start seeing the cost relative to the benefit. And finally, as I mentioned, in terms of implementation, it's important for us to understand what can be leveraged by the point of the mountain team at the master development plan, and what might be relayed all the way down to the parcel level. And again, that's important because we'll have to generate a structure, a policy structure, or a kind of sympathetic structure where the parcels will know what the targets are and they'll have some incentive to strive for them. So I'm going to go quickly, just at a very high level, through some of these. So we have started for stage 3 to look at all of those 5 impact areas, the why. So here's a snapshot, why air quality. I know all of you are very well versed in this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Then we started bucketing our key performance indicators as to good, better, best, right? So we're thinking almost as how we stretch. And also the best in class often have a higher financial impact, but they might have a higher cost benefit. So you might invest more, but the benefits and also the partners might be better in the best category. So then bucketing them into all of our KPIs into major categories. So first, which is not on this, is a demand reduction strategy that our transportation team is working very hard on. So embedded in the framework plan is demand reduction. Then of course, strategies around biking and walking, transit access, electrification, and all of this is meant to result in emissions reductions across the site of 50%. So for each of these buckets of strategies, we've started working with our project teammates on how we can look at all of our assumptions. And then again, ultimately, this is for us to drive towards the highest benefit and lowest cost so we can implement and realize our aspirations. Within all of these, we are working with Leah and Aaron and the team in terms of who are the key stakeholders that could be third party or also partners for each of these strategies. So for instance, with demand management, and I'm just going to go at a high level, our target aspirations is to have 15% vehicular mile transportation reduction for internal trip capture, and then also an additional 15% reduction due to transit access and increased frequency. An enhanced bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And so again, we want 100% of the population within a quarter mile. And 100% sidewalk coverage. And the estimation right now is this might be 10% above business as usual. And perhaps finding partnership with the Wasatch Front Regional Council. As we move on to transit access, frequency becomes really important. So I think all of us understand that the higher the frequency of transit, the more likely people are to adopt and utilize that benefit. Thus improving air quality, health, walkability, and also a reduction in cost, perhaps, for operating your own vehicle. And so there are some preliminary costs from the Sam Schwartz team and WSP. And again, we're looking at how some of those could be reduced or how we can work with the Wasatch Front Regional Transportation Plan. So again, looking at co-benefits. And then finally, electric vehicles. As Regan was talking, I added Aspire into our partners or potential partners. But how could we have 20% electrical vehicles day one with provisions for more in the future? So looking at the idea that dual chargers are roughly 7,200, will be interesting to work with Aspire on this further per charging station, but we have seen that third-party providers sometimes come in and operate the chargers at a benefit to themselves. So again, how do we increase the benefit of this to make a win-win situation? So I'm going to keep running through this unless someone stops me to pause and ask questions. But of course, then we make the case for ecology and all subsequent KPIs. So with ecology, we're in a very rich habitat, 700 species of wildlife and thousands of insects, and almost 250 species of birds alone in the Great Lake salt environment. And so looking at buckets for good, better, best, and of course, good is designing for nature, native and adaptive plantings. But the best of this is really looking at designated habitat refuges, and that would help improve biodiversity indices. So reserving some of the open space, not for people to hike or walk through, but people can observe perhaps from high vantage points, but not disturb the habitat. So essentially we are thinking about making bio islands. So within the three buckets of this, all of the framework master plans go beyond code and look at a 40% open space ratio. We're looking to have residents within 2 blocks of open space. And we're looking to have 40% of our open space as biodiversity refuges. And so, again, this idea of bio islands within our open space that can really improve the species biodiversity. And so again, as we had done with air quality, we really started delving into who our partners could be, like Utah Open Lands. The idea of what is the difference between the baseline and the target aspiration. And so far we're kind of delving into this, but it looks like about 30% open space is typical from the Dairy per City master plan. So we're at a 10% improvement. And of course, the implementation would be a shared cost between the master developer and potentially the parcel developers. Access, of course, is really important. So if we have open space that people can't easily walk to, then that's a problem. But this is something that we're baking into the design so that all residents are within 2 blocks of open space. So the cost is really more of a perhaps an infrastructure or roadworks, but we think that it's quite mild. And as a result, we could have a 200% increase in walkability to open space. So for habitat creation, this idea that's kind of driving the plan in terms of having a percent of our open space reserved for biodiversity is really something quite interesting that we're all considering together. And so what we really think is that this is 100% increase in the cost, because this is not something that is typically involved. There's no code or legislation that asks us to do this. But at the same time, we think that it is a potential for a huge attraction to the site and also a huge leadership stake within the region. So moving on to energy and carbon, and we're seeing this, I think quite interestingly from all of you, and then also within the community stakeholder engagement, that everyone is really excited and mobilized also by the idea of an all-electric net zero point of the mountain. And so the why is there. We know that's the future, and there is a lot of support for this idea for the project. And so, of course, from good, it's really about minimization all the way to best, which is about electrification and 100% renewables. We've also added the idea to prioritize local and low carbon materials in our best category. And so again, there's a range of topics that we've heard from all of you, the Point of the Mountain team, and also from the community. And so that starts with district systems and electrification. Many stakeholders in the region are interested, very helpful, and engaged in research in this topic. The idea of efficiency, which would be leveraged onto parcel developments. But again, there is an incentive for that in terms of a reduction in utility cost. Renewables, and there has been a debate about how much is on or off site. The ranges of FARs we have for the project indicate that we could be about 20% on site if that was a path that we took. But obviously there would have to be a combination of on and off site renewable for us to hit this goal. And then embodied carbon reduction. So how can we prioritize local materials, perhaps timber? We're also seeing some smaller construction of rammed earth, which works really well in this climate. But again, all with local labor to reduce our embodied carbon footprint. So as we did with the other areas of key performance, we looked at what are the details of this, who are the partners, and we think for district systems and electrification, there is a way, and we have seen this in other cities and districts, to have a third party come in and help build the district systems. So in this case, the first cost could be defrayed from the master developer and make this much more financially viable. Again, we also want to build on the history of the site. So some of you may know that the site had a history of district heating at the prison site, and Utah Forge has also done some research into ground source heat exchange. So again, there is a lot of history that could help amplify this idea. Building efficiency, we're all familiar with, and I think it's actually somewhat of an easy sell. I think it will depend too, as we start getting actual development and parcels in place, depending on the type of clients. If efficiency is of high interest, I think part of the onus for the sustainability team is to really share in a egalitarian way what those incentives are, to encourage all parcel developments to have the highest efficiency. So that's some of the work that's on our plate to share with the team. And again, renewables. So like the district systems, renewables, we're seeing that there's a spectrum of third-party development and offsets that could be very reasonable in terms of cost, either cost neutral, a cost benefit in the short term. So again, thinking that the financial incentive around this topic is high and could be higher if more federal incentives come to the table, and that we have local providers like Utah Clean Energy that would be willing and eager partners with the Point of the Mountain team. And then finally, this idea of embodied carbon. So as we look at decarbonizing our operational footprint, we really want to consider the whole life carbon of the development. And that means the embodied carbon in our materials and then the transportation and labor that goes into our project. So obviously we want our project to have a lot of local investment. We want our project to have material transparency and encourage the market to evolve to lower embodied carbon materials. So there are two more topics, and please stop me too if there's an issue with time. But water, of course, scarcity is an issue. Snowpack reducing, increasing drought, and also just making sure that we maintain resources as the region is growing. And so, you know, our goals, like energy, start with efficiency and end with really creating a water cycle that's more cyclical. But also thinking again back to our open space goals, that we really in our best category are thinking about protecting and restoring our ecosystems because of our water cycle improvements. And so our overall targets look at surface hydrology, efficiency, and reuse with an idea of 40% efficiency, 100% rainwater for irrigation, and potentially gray water at building scale. We're learning more about a site north of the point of the mountain that is doing some small scale gray water treatment. And we see that there's a high level of efficiency potential just based on the current program mix for the project. So we think there's efficiency related to fixtures. Of course, there is efficiency if we start reintroducing rainwater reuse into buildings. And then if we also use ultra low flow and gray water reuse. So if you recall on the last slide, I talked about this idea of 40% efficiency on site just from fixtures. But we have potential if we capture all of these, with incentives, all of these water efficiency measures to have a 60% potable water reduction. And if we think about the water future of Draper Valley, 60% is really where we want to go. So if we can't get it day one, we should be planning for that future as water pressure increases in the region. And so again, the team went through a series of discussions about our baseline, our targets, and implementation. Again, this is going to be continued to develop as we issue our stage 3 guidance this week. And so in terms of surface hydrology, we're really thinking about the baseline. So an 80% rainfall event is managed on site for each of the parcels. But of course, we have a much bigger opportunity given the amount of open space we have. And so our target is around 100% of surface runoff biofiltered. So again, we're reconnecting with the aquifer. We propose decoupling storm and sewage networks for cleaner water overflow, but from experience, as we move through the cost estimate, this is actually a very big infrastructure cost savings. And I would not be surprised if it's in the millions of dollars for the scale of the point of the mountain. So it's a win-win in terms of ecology and aquifer as well as cost. And then an idea about stormwater storage for reuse. Typically, this does have an additional cost because there is no code that requires significant amounts of storage. But again, for us, we are thinking about how do we look at this on a spectrum and make the best decisions for the project. So the cost for this is really to be determined as we continue developing the framework master plan. But we see that the implementation of it would be leveraged between the master development team, but also potentially government. So we're seeing that with resiliency on the rise and flash flooding, there is a high incentive to deal with these issues day one and plan for the future. So as we move on to efficiency, I had mentioned 40% indoor water use reduction. But if we include reuse from either rainwater or gray water management, this could bump up to 60%. So again, there is a high benefit in reducing water consumption, but the cost may also be a driver in this, as we know. And finally, this last topic on water is really about reuse. So business as usual does not account for reuse. But we're thinking that if we collect rainwater or condensate recovery, either at our building level air handling units or at a district plant, and have gray water reuse at a building scale, we could have on average, depending on our program mix, up to 60% reduction in water. And then the final topic is waste. So of course, waste and waste management is an issue. It's something that we'll have to leverage as an infrastructure and ongoing operational potential for the point of the mountain. And so we want to prioritize access to recycling facilities that are walkable, but also talk about behavior change in a highly sustainable development like the point. How can we drive incentivization and behavior change by residents? And so in terms of our goal, good is quite simple. It's about expanding safe recovery and reuse, and also minimizing construction and operational waste. On the best side, it's more about demonstration. And so I think we all recognize that regardless of what city we're in the United States, it's difficult to incentivize waste because there isn't a corollary cost savings. And so part of our diversion scheme is really how do we incentivize a little bit more with behavior change diversion. So, you know, elements like metal, scrap metal, these all get recycled because there's a high value in the market. Plastics and others, not so much. But again, part of our idea with waste is really to plan for the future where there is a higher incentivization around current recyclables. And so we have 3 buckets, improving our recycling rates from an occupant perspective, reducing construction waste to landfill. And so what we do as we build a project will dwarf the early years of recycling by occupants on the project. So having a high diversion from landfill during construction is really important for the overall sustainable story for the project. And then finally, can we have some small waste to energy plants? And again, we're not proposing that the entire site goes to waste to energy, but we think that there is certainly room for demonstration that could grow up over time. So essentially looking at composting that could generate biofuels and potentially research for the site with an educational partner. Again, so looking at recycling, what we've learned about the region is that a 40% diversion rate is typical. It varies slightly by county around Draper City. And we're targeting a 10% increase in recycling rate. I would say we might be able to go more ambitiously with that target. And we're doing a little bit more research to see about the futures for that. As I mentioned, then the next, of course, is a 75% diversion from landfill. It seems highly plausible that we can do that based on current ordinance in Salt Lake City. I think Alan and Steve and others have cautioned us that the Draper Valley is a slightly different market in terms of code and policy. But again, we think that given the overall aspirations for the project, we should push for this. And we think that there is some financial incentive, particularly on the construction waste side. So contractors typically have a modest financial incentive to divert waste, just because the scrap metal, the drywall and others are recycled into existing industrial processes. And then finally, the idea of waste to energy. So business as usual doesn't include waste to energy, but provisions for composting and site-wide waste to energy would have some incentive for team members on the site, occupants, and potentially research and innovation. So with that, I think we just wanted to end with, I think, a slide that talks a little bit about what all this adds up to. And again, you know, I ramble through in 20 minutes very quickly, really a lot of detail. And I think we just want to open the floor for your comments, considerations, and concerns as we move to make our aspirations reality on the project.
Thank you, Ms. Gauda, for your presentation. There's a lot there, and maybe I'm only speaking for myself, but the sustainability is an area that we should focus on, but maybe haven't given as much thought to until this time. I will remind the board that Utah is the second driest state in the country in terms of rainfall, second only to Nevada. And we oftentimes think of my home down here as being where that's only applicable, but the reality is rainfall in our state is valuable, and this year is in short supply in terms of our snowpack. So this is a very timely discussion on all of these elements, but maybe especially on the water conservation issue. I don't want to dominate this discussion. I want to turn some time to the board to ask some questions about Arthea on this presentation and about the sustainability elements that have been built into the legislation and kind of a directive for us to take these issues into consideration as we plan. Questions from the board?
I have a comment, not a question, but it was amazing presentation, really a terrific vision. I wanted to raise the awareness. I was particularly interested in the discussion about waste to energy. And Alan, you know about this project. I was thinking about this, and it's called, let's see, Wasatch Resource Recovery in North Salt Lake. So they have these digesters. So they capture food waste. And in partnership with Dominion, then our natural gas supplier, they will convert that and purify it, and that becomes renewable natural gas, which when you factor in that the methane could have been just gone into the atmosphere, the emissions, it becomes net negative. But I could see, Alan, and to the consultants as well, that ought to be something we ought to think about. I could see an on-site or nearby site that could be producing renewable natural gas for the point. So I thought that was a great part of the presentation. I just raised that up for everyone's thinking and consideration. There you go.
Thanks, Representative. Further comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I'd like to make a motion that we do call it Draper Valley. I think that was an excellent addition to the presentation. That's a good name, but no, that was a great presentation. I would like us to. I think we should focus our sustainability efforts on, like we had in the first presentation, with vehicles, emissions being cut down. I'm good with recycling as well, but the problem with recycling, if any of you are local elected officials and have a program, you know that it's fickle, and and what gets recycled and what actually goes into the landfill, sometimes it's all the same. So I think the things we can recycle, that's great. I certainly would like to see water friendly landscaping everywhere that it can possibly be, because that area is dry now. It's always been, it looks like it has since the Fremont Indians were here. So it hasn't changed in thousands and thousands of years. So the concept of watering it and turning into a grassy area is probably not smart for us with our drought situation. I like the sustainability concept with reducing vehicle emissions with autonomous electric charged vehicles. I think that's a way we should go. I do think that the LEED certified buildings are outstanding ways to, improve our carbon output and make that place unique. I support efforts in those areas. I just think water and vehicle emissions are probably the thing that will have the most impact on the valley once that area gets built. But thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Great comments. And I kind of like Draper Valley name too. That's something you should take up with your city council, perhaps. But questions from the board? I've got a couple, but I want to make sure that we hear from the board first. So my question is, and maybe Peter and Steve, along with Arathi, could chime in on this. When we're working potentially with master developers, we invite them to make proposals, and we outline as part of the proposal our commitment. I'm using this as an example to sustainability elements that may affect infrastructure, could affect building design, and all of those things. Are these embraced now generally by developers, or do they look at some of these requirements in a negative way that and maybe distract from interest? Do you understand my question?
Sure. Let me jump in on that. I think it's a mix. It's as with most things, it's really kind of a mix. You're going to find some more enlightened, progressive developers understand that having a certain level of sustainability and actually they think of it more as high performance building actually helps them in terms of their leasing if they're going for larger clients, larger companies, international companies that now have in their own values the desire to only, only rent space that has a fairly high level of of performance. And so you'll have that, but on the other hand, and that's a good thing. It tends to be more focused in the office arena than in the housing arena or retail arena. But the thing that we have to understand as we go through this list, I mean, this is a wonderful set of targets and aspirations. But there are Arathi was as it started to integrate the cost dimension into this, and the costs are significant to achieve these things. There's going to be our hope is that prior to going out to the development community and actually giving the district developers specific guidelines, there's more work that we need to do to narrow down this menu of items and identify, as we were just talking about, what are the priorities, what are the ones that we want to focus and we can are the cost and be able to invest in, because we're not going to probably be able to do it all. And if we want to get any revenue out of the land anyway. So this next stage of this program of focusing on the cost, doing some cost benefit analysis, adding up the cost of these different programs is going to be key to bring back to you to help clarify what we want to go to the development community with that is reasonable.
Thanks, Steve. Peter, you care to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I think these are very smart targets, very achievable targets that will really distinguish the project. We are working with Arthi to incorporate all of the mechanics of how to deliver these into the plan right now. So that's great. And I think reaching out to people like Regan to really test the viability and not only the viability, but the implications of each of these ideas is a really great thing to be doing right now. So I will be working closely with Arthi over the next month to refine these aspirations, clarify why they're important, how we deliver them, and how it relates to other strategies for the project, such as smart city strategies and some of the key vision elements like that.
Thank you. And we'd appreciate that. Carrie, did you?
Yeah, Representative Snow, I just have an observation that we should integrate into our thinking. It's rare that we get to master plan and develop such a large development in the United States. And all of these aspirations are much more achievable at this scale. And typically anything done at a district scale will give you much greater return in terms of your sustainability performance against the investment. But what we have to work out very carefully is the business deal. It comes back to who's doing the horizontal and how are those costs shared. If we could figure that out, we could really push water conservation and energy conservation and sustainability for the lowest possible price here, because the scale that we're working at. But it all comes down to how can you bring together those costs, somehow share them maybe it's like a green benefits district, or, I really don't know exactly the approach, but we have a great opportunity here, and structuring the business deal will make a big difference to the development community.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. I don't know, Peter or Steve, who's put the financial strategies up, or whose presentation that is.
I think that's Arthi still.
Arthi, you're on mute.
Just to add one line to Carrie and then pass it over for other questions. I think Carrie is hitting the nail on the head in that between the master planning and then parcel development, there has to be a lot of knowledge sharing. And I think, again, a spectrum of public-private development. And there are certain aspects of the project that it might make more sense to be publicly funded, public-private, and there's a spectrum. There isn't one thing that fits every aspect of the project to have the lowest financial impact. One that I highlighted was this idea of decoupling storm and sewage. And we've seen that that has been a big driver in terms of that horizontal infrastructure cost. But there are many aspects as we continue to develop the project that we'll see that there is a cost savings at scale. One kind of coalition that we've looked at is called a 2030 district. Carrie called this like a green core, a kind of knowledge sharing. But looking at something like this for the point where all parcels or property developers are onboarded into the goals and all of the incentives that are at their fingertips is really important to make sure that people don't turn away from kind of the initial hurdle or kind of the design hurdles that they might perceive. So again, we are thinking about that as a project develops, how there can be an onboarding process so everyone's on the same page, but also as we had mentioned, not everyone is going to come from the same place in terms of their knowledge about these issues and strategies, even if they have good intentions and the same belief system. So we have to make it easy for them to be green. And so that'll be part of what we're working on together with all of you.
If I could just tag on a little bit, and that is that one of the things that we've observed is the local public utilities, jurisdictions and public works departments often end up, being somewhat set in their ways of how things get built. And when we talk about innovation in terms of stormwater and potable water, that we often run into barriers, with local public agencies. And it's not to be critical of them because they have mandates to maintain the health, of the population and do that in a very conservative, safe way, and also to, avoid any kind of liability and so forth. So to the extent we can get a enhanced cooperation with the public infrastructure and utility entities, it would make some of these programs much easier to achieve.
Thank you, all of you. And other questions? Let me just say that, Steve, we're glad you're on board, and I, for only one voice on the commission, appreciate what you said about your help in evaluating these sustainability elements, working with RCLCO to see how much we can do and still sustain a viable financial model. And we may have, as a state-owned project, so to speak, we may have a little more latitude than private enterprise, but we still have to keep our eye on the fact that we still have to show a profitable return, I believe. So, but I'll reinforce the idea that we may have some flexibility that way. So these are really important discussions. And I think, as I said, the public is hoping to see us address some of these aspirational goals too. It's important for them to see that we make an effort, which is a good lead in to the next item on the agenda, unless there are further comments at this point on this item or questions. So with that, kind of a prelude, number 7 on our agenda is the housing affordability at the point. I think all of us have read in the news and have heard our leaders in the state talk about Utah faces a real affordability challenge, especially in housing. It's a statewide challenge. It affects my area down here. It affects areas on the Wasatch Front in northern Utah. It seems to be a statewide issue right now. Members of the public have weighed in on this issue, stakeholder groups. The media has really focused on this issue. I had a discussion with our director, Alan, who told me that and he may correct me, but I think he said he had 4 or 5 media interviews last week after the public meeting, and many of them focused on whether this board had a commitment to addressing housing affordability. This project cannot solve all of the affordability issues for our state, but we probably should be sensitive to the issue, and we may be able to address part of the issue. Aaron and Steve, I say it often, but I mean when I say how much we appreciate your help. We've invited them to share a few thoughts about the affordability issue and the availability at this project. So with that, Aaron and Steve will turn the time over to you to help us how that issue can maybe addressed here in this project.
Thanks, Representative Snow. And good morning, everyone. Ellen, I wasn't sure if you wanted to do a quick introduction or if you just want Steve and I to jump in.
I'd like you to jump in. I think you're very much, because you're working on this project in the state, you're aware of the focus, and I suspect that it's not just happening in the state of Utah, it's probably elsewhere. But help us understand the issue and maybe some ways that it could be addressed as we move our plan forward.
Perfect. I will jump in then. And we will keep it pretty quick, because I know that really what we'd like to hear is this group start to think through some of these issues. And so hoping you all can see my screen. You know, a lot of you have probably, that was a yes. A lot of you have probably, either in your own communities or in the state as a whole, sort of hear more about the question of housing affordability. And, I think it's a logical topic and need for Utah and especially this region to be focused on right now, because there's been so much growth and so many people moving into the state, from elsewhere. And so, the kind of shorthand that I would encourage you all to think about is, it's actually very difficult, and there's a lot of different definitions for affordable housing. And so we try to talk about it in terms of housing affordability or housing attainability, which really gets to a broader set of questions about a range of incomes and a range of product types. And so, at a very high level, the 3 things I think to keep in mind right now are that, Utah just needs more housing supply at all price points, right? There's a lot of people moving here. There's a lot of job growth, and those people need somewhere to live. And if we don't keep building that housing, what happens is some of the things that I see in my own community in Washington, D.C., which is that, you look for existing homes and you make those homes more expensive. And then the people that would have been able to afford those homes go look for cheaper homes and make those homes more expensive. And you have this spiraling effect where all of the supply gets priced up because there just isn't enough housing. And the second thing is that, Utah does especially need more housing at lower and moderate price points and rents, because as land and building costs get more expensive, the new housing that's delivered is at a higher price point than it used to be. And the third thing to consider is that part of this conversation is about a broader diversity of housing options. You'll sometimes hear it called missing middle housing. But what that means is kind of some of these images you see on the screen in terms of thinking about housing in less of a binary between single family, or townhomes and a really large apartment building, and all of the scales of buildings that might be available in between. And you can probably think about areas in the Salt Lake region that have some of these building types today. In fact, Daybreak as a master plan community has really been a great example and a pioneer in ways to build some of these different housing types in new communities. So just high level thoughts before we jump into strategies. The commonly accepted definition on affordability is that your housing costs don't exceed 30% of your gross income. And so there are a lot of households in the region today that are already paying more than that, when you look at some of the census data. And, that location plays a role, right? The longer, one of the ways that we've always built more affordable housing is we've just gone to where the cheaper land is. And, historically that wasn't that far from jobs, but today it is starting to get farther from jobs. And so transportation is a bigger cost for a lot of households than it used to be. And I think the third thing that really hits home for me when I think about the point site, especially is as we're focused on economic development, high and increasing housing prices really can have a negative impact on job growth and on economics. And, thinking about affordability in close proximity to jobs really can be a meaningful impact for those households and for those who are trying to think about, how they make, their overall life and goals sustainable. Sorry, I'm trying to make it advance. Okay. So, quick thoughts. There's a lot you could dive into here. You're going to hear the term area median income as a way of thinking about affordability. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here today, but there are lots of federal programs, especially, and therefore lots of also state and local programs that help subsidize and fund different types of affordable and workforce and income restricted housing. And they use some definitions around area median income that are shown, on the right that would apply to this site. And so, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of more moderate income households, are people you interact with every day, teachers and accountants and bank clerks and, electricians and other building repair, social workers. And so it's really about having a sustainable community, where everyone can find something that meets their needs. And when we look at just a very high level look at the region today, similar to how we would dig in other places, the interesting thing to me is that new apartment rents in the broader kind of Point of the Mountain area are not that far off of what's affordable to somebody at 100 or 100%, 120% of AMI. But you just aren't building that many 2 or 3 bedroom options for families that would meet those rent points that are affordable. And in fact, some jurisdictions don't allow for new multifamily construction. And so that's leading to limited supply, even though, we could all, look out the window of almost any building in the Point of the Mountain and probably point to a newer apartment building. So I know it feels like there's probably a lot of multifamily construction, even though in the grand scheme of things, it's actually more limited than it probably needs to be. And maybe the second thing to consider is that on the for sale front, prices have really escalated out of reach for most of the households, under about 150% of AMI, which is a fairly well off, household. That's incomes, above 100,000 here. And, that's one thing I think to think about going forward is, what it is we could do to provide some more attainable price points, either on site or in the near vicinity, so that we could maybe not subsidize, but really have a more diverse set of housing options that some of these families might be able to afford. So a few things that we see, local jurisdictions and other entities doing to address and encourage affordability are also things that we as an organization could try to enact, right? With the one difference being that, in a lot of cases, a jurisdiction is responding to the fact that they set the rules for what can get built, but they don't set the land prices. And so one thing to keep in mind is that we're both the land seller, even if we lease the land, we're the land seller in terms of setting the price, but we're also the approval body. And so that kind of limits in some ways the levers that we can pull that will be effective, because we're sort of having our cake and eating it too in some cases, right? Like, there's not if the developer says, oh, well, the land's too expensive to do that, we were the ones that set that price. So, there's specific things that jurisdictions use that may not be as great for us, and other things that it opens up. So one option is often called inclusionary zoning. And this would be the easiest thing to apply on our side, right? That would be to set an affordability target, either applicable to each building, or applicable to a district or a site-wide scale to encourage a mixed income community. So most frequently, you would see 10 or 15% of units required to go to a set income range, whether it's 60 or 80 or 100% of AMI. And you can do some really sophisticated targeting in there so that those units remain permanently affordable over a longer term time frame. Another thing you see is density bonuses, and that might be an option here too. That means if somebody provides some more targeted or income targeted housing on their property, that you'd allow them to build more than they otherwise would be allowed to. That's going to be a little tricky on our site, just because we're trying to encourage density. And when you look around, I know we've heard really clearly from Mayor Walker that he'd love to see higher density, and they're allowing plenty of density, and people are still building 4 stories. And so, I think density bonuses might have a limited impact here, at least in the short term. The next 3 are programs that I think you could adapt to the site that would be interesting. One is a housing trust fund, which often is, providing loans or other financing to developers who are really trying to do deeply affordable or other special needs housing to help with the financial feasibility. And that capital ideally gets returned to the fund over time, so it becomes self-sustaining. The second is a community land trust. So this actually just tries to take land out of the equation on certain property types, especially for sale, so that homeowners really just have to buy the house. They don't have to buy the land too. And the third is a preservation strategy, usually executed through first right of refusal. So if you think about a lot of older apartment buildings that you might see in your community, those are maybe what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, right? The rents just are at levels that somebody with a lower income can afford. And the biggest challenge is that as land gets scarcer, those properties get snapped up by people who want to either renovate them and raise the rents, or who think they're at the end of their lifespan and want to redevelop them. And so you see jurisdictions actually purchasing those properties and trying to preserve them. Obviously we don't have any older apartments on site, but it might be a way in which we could contribute to the broader community if there was an interest in doing that in the broader Point of the Mountain area. And so, those are, I think, a few of the ways that other people are dealing with affordable housing. One of the things that we could do specifically as the landowner, and I know Steve is a big fan of this one, is just to encourage some naturally affordable housing options, like the triplex or the quadplex housing or smaller apartment buildings, or even just, lower density options that might have some larger units like 2 and 3 bedrooms that could be, built profitably and rented to more moderate income households. The key there is that we would probably want to make sure that we had a required affordability period, so that, as we added all these jobs at the site, those apartments just didn't get much more expensive because people really wanted to live there and were willing to pay more. And so that's an issue we can solve, but something to keep in mind. And then, the other options might be to partner with some local nonprofits who would either deliver or help identify households who might be candidates for housing on site, or to think about ways that we might contribute into, a fund that we run or a fund that the broader area runs, that would help drive affordability in the broader area in addition to on site. And so we could actually put some of these ideas together And, it's not an either or strategy, right? You could set an affordability target for the community. You could also set aside some land for more naturally affordable housing options and, set some restrictions on how long they have to be affordable. And you could also, pursue something like this fund idea. So these are kind of a mix and match bag of options that are out there and that people have really proven have potential, and that in a lot of cases developers know how to use. I think a lot of the national developers that we might talk to in this process will be very familiar with the idea of affordability targets or some of these nonprofit partnerships. They're used to seeing those on the scale of opportunity. Just to give you one example, obviously Tyson's Corner, just outside of DC in Virginia, I know it well, and so I wanted to share it as an example because it's not because it's perfect for the site, but because I can explain the program well. So this is a 2,000-acre suburban area that we're trying to encourage a lot more density, and so I think it has a lot of similarities to the point in the sense that, unlike areas where we're trying to restrict density potentially, they want people to build as much housing and new office and new retail here as they can. And they also know that the rents today are actually not that far off of workforce rents on the low end, especially for smaller units, but that if they're successful in adding all this infill and redevelopment, the rents will go up a lot over time. And so one of the things they set out was a kind of a set of income tiers that you can see on the right, where they said, okay, well, we'd like to get, 20% of units on site affordable to workforce housing, customers, on a variety of income levels, right? So it's not just deeply affordable. It's not just, moderate or higher income households. And, these are income bands that developers work into their projects and know that they have to plan around as they build sites. And so it produces mixed income projects where, within the same building, there's a variety of different income levels, but it's fairly graduated. As you can see, it's not, 20% of the lowest incomes or 20% of the highest. So it actually has a more muted impact on the economics of the projects. And so this is not a carbon copy, we'll just do this, but we could work through an idea like this so that we could preserve some affordability on site over the long term. As inevitably, I think rents and prices in the region are probably going to continue to going up like they have in the past. So I'll just open it up to this group, with that as background. The feedback that we're really looking for today is, should the framework plan pursue a housing affordability strategy? Any of the ideas that we've thrown out or others that maybe you all are familiar with. And, just if any of these options resonated with you as strategies that we should dig into more and consider. So I'll turn it back to you, Representative Snow.
If I could just add a couple comments, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
That's a really good overview that Aaron put together, and I even learned a few things as this was coming together. I've worked on when I was on the developer side. Affordable housing was a big part of our life because every jurisdiction we worked in had some requirement, and so I just a couple of summary comments, just different filters on this. First of all, one of the things that I would encourage is that we maintain maximum flexibility from the developer's point of view. I think, the Tyson's Corner, I think, is a very interesting model, because it's fairly fine-grained and detailed, but at the same time, there's a lot of flexibility on allowing the development community to figure out how to meet those targets in a manner that is most supportive of their business plan and their success. So I think flexibility is a key. And I always think, and another filter is just, I always think of two baskets on this topic. And one basket is a lot of what Aaron was talking about were, quote, regulatory affordability strategies, where homes are built and they actually are, they have to commit to a fairly long period of time that they achieve a certain price point and a certain income level for their tenants. And sometimes it's 35 years, sometimes it's 55 years. And there's a monitoring program, and that's all kind of part of the deal. And that needs to be a part of this program, probably, because that's being done across the country. But there's this other side, which has been kind of the forgotten part of it, is this, as Aaron pointed out, the lost middle ground. And that is, housing types that are not regulated per se, but they are encouraged to just be less expensive because they're built less expensively. They're at densities that are just very surgically picked to where, you get the most square footage for the lowest construction cost. Parking solutions are simplified, so they're not as expensive. And that provides housing that is, just naturally market driven, addresses sort of this middle ground, of affordability. And so that can be another part of this puzzle if we want to go there. So anyway, those are just a couple of other thoughts.
Thank you, Steve. Good thoughts and comments. And Aaron, again, thanks for your presentation. Aaron asked what I call a policy question. That was her first question, and that is, from the board members, to what extent do you feel like the addressing the affordability housing issue is something that we should give attention to? Is it something that we should pay enough attention to that we work it into our planning? I've got some opinions on that, but I'll reserve them until you all have some time to weigh in. April.
I'm a huge proponent of us figuring out how to have some type of affordability at the point. And I really liked how Aaron also used the term attainability. So Tyson's Corner is where I worked some of my first jobs as a young adult, like, 18, 19, 20 years old. And back then in the 80s, there was still quite a bit of green space and little things around there. But as it's developed out, she's using a great example because in like the 70s and 80s, people that lived in Arlington, we tended to jump on the subway to go towards DC. We typically went towards the city and never really thought about jumping on a subway. We all drove our cars out to Tyson's in McLean, Virginia. But now the Silver Line goes out there. So over the last 30 years, as it's developed out and they've put apartments and young professionals can live, if they can't afford a house in McLean, then they're in an apartment or a condo or something like that. Really nice restaurants, easy transportation to get out there. So not a lot of cars. I think it's just an incredible model that she used for us to kind of think about, because they've been able to get people out there, have some affordable housing, but yet still really keep like crime rates down. It's just a really great, it's a place that's fun to go. It's got great shopping, great restaurants, lots of jobs. The one thing I keep mentioning though, so the housing's great, and we keep talking about this master plan and developers, and I don't know if we're spending enough time in our board meeting talking about recruiting companies. Alan mentioned that in that public meeting. It was one of the first things he said, that one of our directives is job creation. So I just want to make sure that we're continuing to think, are there firms we want to recruit, and do we have the ability to offer them what Aaron was just saying, something different? Maybe they get the underlying land for a little bit less if they're bringing in a certain amount of jobs, or the land doesn't get passed through a developer first. They just work with a developer. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas there, but I think we really need to work on job creation and recruiting too.
Thank you, April. Good comments. Further comments on this issue of affordability housing and its inclusion into our planning process.
So Representative Snow, this is Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Hey, I think that we absolutely have to include it in there. I'm just not sure to what level. I think that, it would be to our detriment not to include it and address it to some level. but I think it's just finding out what that balance is. And I appreciate Aaron's definition that really affordability is that 30% mark, because I think a lot of people that read media articles on that are thinking that it has to do with low-income housing, in which it doesn't, because you hear that sometimes. So I support the idea of having it in our plan, and maybe there should be some sort of a goal for that for each development district, but I'm not sure exactly what that would be at this time. And then just to wrap up, one other thing on sustainability, if it's okay, I would really like my assistant director that manages our high performance building standard to be involved in the discussion somewhere. I think she could probably add something to that discussion.
Thank you, Jim. And Alan, that sounds like an offer to me from Jim and Steve. If you'd tap that resource, sounds like that would make sense on sustainability. Thank you, Jim, for your comments also about affordability. Other comments on Aaron's presentation or about policy issues in incorporating this element?
I have one more question. Aaron, thanks for such a great presentation. Is there examples of like other areas around the country doing something like we've heard that Pluralsight was going to do, where they're going to bring their corporate headquarters nearby, but at the same time, they're also going to build a campus with some housing for their employees? Because typically what you'll find in Utah is if you go somewhere to get a job, that company's certainly not like providing your housing. You're buying your house or renting your apartment somewhere else. Are there some examples of something like that? Are there pros and cons? Does that just not work at all? Or is that something we could look at?
Yeah, I think it's something worth considering. I don't have a ton of other examples, and I don't know the Pluralsight one that well in terms of what they're proposing. But certainly one of the things that I think the SOM team has identified as part of their master planning, and that we've observed as well, is that housing is really important to these major employers, whether they're going to provide it, like I think you're describing the Pluralsight model, or if they're going to plan it as part of their campus and have somebody else, build and operate it like market rate housing. And so, I think either of those are possibilities here. And the key is ensuring that within the framework planning process that we allow for that to be a possibility, right? So that we ensure that we aren't, we're focused on jobs, but we're also focused on making sure that there's opportunities for housing on site so that somebody could come in and pursue that strategy that you're describing.
Thank you. Other comments on this issue?
I just wanted to clarify on the Pluralsight situation. So Pluralsight didn't actually provide the housing. It's another developer that we just, as a city, zoned it so the housing could be in close proximity to it. But Pluralsight didn't provide, the housing being built by a developer in conjunction with the plan. So so April knew, but I think it's a good model. We certainly need to have affordable housing for workforce people. Specifically, when I say that, I mean police, firefighters, public works people, those kind of things. We'd like to be able to have those folks live in our community as well and have it affordable so they can be here and in the community where they work. So I support that wholeheartedly, to figure out a way to provide that right level of affordable housing.
Thank
Troy,
you, Mayor.
Thanks, Troy, for clarifying that. I wasn't sure how it all worked, because you just kind of hear stuff in the media, and I wasn't sure how it all went down. I just thought it was kind of a neat idea to have housing right by where the jobs are.
Yeah, we've tried that on a couple of our sites with respect to zoning, like over where Front Runner is. Aaron was right. I complained about the 4-story housing, but that's an area where we zoned it for unlimited height and unlimited density. So maybe we need to have height restrictions in the sense it has minimum heights in this site, because you know how those pencils work when it gets to the developer. So I'm for minimum height restrictions.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we've heard that before, Mayor. But that's a good reminder. Other comments about affordability? Well, let me say
I just want us to keep in mind that sometimes there's a misconception that higher density actually allows lower cost, for housing. And of course, it's actually just the opposite, that as we increase density, the cost over a certain point, and it's fairly low, of about 30 units to the acre, that the actual cost goes up of construction costs. So we've got a little bit of a built-in dilemma that complicates this issue for us in that we want to push density, but on the other hand, it does push us in a different direction than what we're currently talking about on this topic.
Thank you, Steve. I'm assuming, Steve, there is a sweet spot, though, that some optimum.
Well, there's a sweet spot for sort of workforce housing. It tends to be, 3-story, maybe 4-story, but mostly 3-story stick frame construction with surface parking, which isn't a very super efficient use of our land. Our land is very valuable. But I think Aaron made the point early on, and that is, if you make it a level playing ground, where there's some set criteria that's very clear to everybody at the get-go, that they'll build that into their economic models as long as it's not too egregious, and they're used to doing that. So we just have to find that sensitivity point where it isn't we can get some good outcome and some quantity, but at the same time not be overly punitive to the developer side.
Thanks for that, Steve. So you will all recall, or not recall, but if you look on our agenda, you'll see that this item number 7 is included for action. And I'll say that before I say what I'm going to say. But I think it's important that we realize that we are on a board overseeing a state project. It is state land, and I think the state leadership has recognized that affordability of housing is a significant issue right now in our state. We also need to be reminded that in order for the project to go forward, we're going to be looking for state support. We're going to be looking for state funding, which means that funding comes when it's coming from the state, it's coming from taxpayers. So I tell you all of that to say, occasionally we hear from private developers a real hesitancy to tackle or get too involved in affordability housing. They oftentimes see it as a bit of a negative to their bottom line. We're not a private developer. That doesn't mean, again, that we don't have to be conscious of the bottom line, but it does mean that we have somewhat of a duty to the citizens of the state. We also have, I think, some obligation to be sensitive to what leadership has maintained in our state to be a significant issue. So that's a prelude, I suppose, to what I think would be an important motion. And we don't have to, at this point, apply a lot of detail to that motion in terms of what this looks like. But I do think it's important that we have a motion and a decision of this board that says we recognize this as an issue and that we intend to address it, or at least include it as part of our plan for this project. Now, that's me speaking, and sometimes the chair should be quiet, but it's something that I feel like is important for our board to at least discuss and potentially take action on.
So if nobody else is prepared, I can make a motion. Representative Snow.
We'll call on you, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, I would make a motion that the board recognizes the issue of affordable housing and that we move forward in support of determining the right mix or right level of affordable housing and involvement in this project.
Thank you for the motion. Jim, do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, April, for the second. Discussion to the motion that's before us.
Can I just make a general point? I think we've got to be a little careful with terminology, and affordable housing is often a defined term. So I think we need to be careful if the motion talks about affordable housing, and maybe we speak in terms of housing affordability or housing attainability as we started off in this discussion. Just a suggestion.
I agree with that. I'd like to see that amendment amended to reflect that language.
So Steve, as a board member, do you have a substitute motion?
I'd like to make that substitute motion, incorporate Mr. Matheson's language adjustments to housing attainability. Is that what you said, Alan? What did you say? How did you say that, Alan?
Yeah, I think we could use housing attainability or housing affordability.
Yeah, those terms to be incorporated are better said, I think.
Could we use both those terms? Okay.
Yes.
As I understand the motion, then the substitute motion is to essentially adopt Jim's motion, but use, instead of affordable housing, use housing affordability and housing attainability. Is that correct, Steve?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Do I have a second to that motion on the substitute motion?
Can I second? I don't think I can second that substitute.
Yeah, you can second, and you can adopt that as a friendly substitute. Is that your position, Jim?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, that's accomplished then. So the motion before us is that we, as a board, we recognize the importance of providing housing, and that we also that we intend as a board to incorporate principles of housing affordability and attainability in our planning of the project. Did I state that well enough, Steve? Thank you. So I'll call for discussion on the substitute motion. Any further discussion? All right, we'll place it for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you very much for your work today, all of you, for members of the board, for our consultants that have attended and helped us with this project. I'll just ask Alan, is there any wrap-up items that we need to quickly inform the board about before we adjourn?
Let me do it in 2 minutes. First of all, thanks so much for, you saw we put some challenging issues before you today, policy issues that maybe should have come earlier, but we've had a lot of things going on and that took precedent. But we're getting increasingly to a time where trade-offs are the theme of the day. We'll be having to make some decisions about amenities at the site, elements of the site that have a cost associated with them. So thanks for taking that on, and probably more to come. Let me just quickly give an update. We've got meetings with 12 developer groups later this week and early next week to get their input on deal structure, land disposition strategy, and our plans. We've put out a notice of a position for Director of Operations that closes on the 19th, but as of yesterday, I think we had 50 applicants already, so there's a lot of interest in that. Today is the deadline for some that we've reached out to and invited to be members of that advisory council that you approved. Outstanding folks, and I may be reaching out to one or two of you to help in that review process. And I'll just let you know, we had 13 media stories last week on the point and the work we're doing. And then finally, just as a heads up, as we move ahead, at our next meeting, we'll be asking you to approve a budget for fiscal year 22. And so we'll be working on the details of that and probably give you some previews over the course of the next few weeks so that you can provide a little input before we present a formal budget to you. And I think that's all I'll share at this point, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alan, for the update. As I started out with the meeting, there is a lot going on. Things are moving quickly. Thanks for all you do, Alan. With that, the chair would entertain a final motion.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. Motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, April. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.